It was a nice summer day. My 5-year-old son, James, was playing outside in the backyard of our suburban home. James has always been a quiet boy. He plays by himself mostly. He never had many friends, but he has also had a very wild imagination. I was sitting in the kitchen feeding our dog, Fido, when I heard what sounded like James talking to someone in the backyard. I'm not sure who it could have been, but he was definitely talking to someone. Could he have finally made a friend? Being a single mom, it's hard for me to always keep an eye on my son, so I decided to go outside and check on him. When I was in the backyard, I was a bit confused because James was the only person back there. Was he talking to himself? I could have sworn I heard another voice. "James, it's time to come inside," I called out to him. He came inside and sat down at the kitchen table. It was about lunchtime, so I decided to make him a turkey sandwich. "James, who are you talking to out there?" I asked. James looked up for a moment. "I was playing with my friend," he said, smiling. I poured some milk and continued to pry as any good mother would. "Does your friend have a name?" "Why didn't you ask him to have lunch with us?" I asked James. He just stared at me for a moment before replying. "His name is Laughing Jack." I was a bit taken aback by what he said. "Oh, that's a strange name. What does your friend look like?" I asked, a bit confused. "He's a clown. He has long hair and a big swirly cone nose. He's got long arms and baggy pants with stripy socks. And he always smiles." I realized my son was talking about an imaginary friend. I suppose it's normal for kids his age to have imaginary friends, especially when he has no real kids to play with. It's probably just a phase. The rest of the day went per usual. It was starting to get late, so I put James to bed, and I tucked him in and gave him a kiss. I made sure to turn on the night light before I closed the door. I was pretty tired myself, so I decided to go to bed not long after. I had an awful nightmare. It was dark, and I was in some kind of rundown amusement park. I was scared, running through an endless field of empty tents, broken down rides, and abandoned game huts. The whole place had a horrible look to it. Everything was black and white. The prize stuffed animals all hung from nooses in the game huts, with sick grins stitched all over their faces. It felt like the whole park was looking at me, even though there wasn't another living thing in sight. Then I suddenly began to hear music play. The sounds of "Pop Goes the Weasel" began playing on a squeeze box, which echoed through the park. It was hypnotizing. I followed its tune to the circus tent almost in a trance, unable to stop my legs from moving forward. It was pitch black. The only light came from a single spotlight shining in the center of the big top. As I walked toward the light, the music slowed down, and I find myself unable to stop walking. All around the mulberry bush, the monkey chased the weasel. The monkey thought all 'twas fun. The music stopped right before its climax, and suddenly the light shut on. The intensity of the lights was practically blinding. All I could see was a small, dark silhouette shuffle towards me. Then another appeared, and another, and another. There were dozens of them, all coming toward me. I couldn't move. My legs were frozen. All I could do was watch the haunting figures draw nearer. As they got close, I could see there were children. As I looked at each one, I noticed they were horribly disfigured and mutilated. Some had cuts all over their body. Others were severely burnt, and others were missing limbs and even eyes. The children enveloped me, clawing at my flesh, dragging me to the ground, and tearing inside me. As the children tore me apart and I faded away, all I could hear was laughter. Horrible, awful, and evil laughter. I woke up the next morning in a cold sweat after taking a few deep breaths. I is that James had put his action figures positioned facing me on my nightstand. I sighed. James had probably woken up early and put these out here. I gathered up the toys, made my way to James's room. However, when I opened the door, James was sound asleep. I just shrugged and placed the toys on his toy box. Confused, I headed toward the living room. A little while later, James woke up, and I made him his breakfast. He was quiet and seemed a little bit groggy. Perhaps he didn't sleep well either. I decided to ask him about the toys. James, honey, did you put the toys in Mommy's room out this morning? His eyes shot up for a moment, then quickly glanced back down at his cereal. Laughing Jack did it. I rolled my eyes and responded, "Will you tell Laughing Jack to keep your toys in your room?" James nodded and finished up his breakfast. Then he decided to go play outside in the backyard. I went to relax in the living room and must have dozed off because I woke up a couple of hours later. Shit! I need to check on James. I was a bit worried. It had been over 2 hours and I haven't checked on him. I went outside into the backyard, but James wasn't there anymore. I was getting nervous, so I called out to him, "James! James, where are you?" Just then, I heard a giggle come from the front yard. I rushed through the gate around the front of the house. James was sitting on the sidewalk. I breathed a sigh of relief, then walked over to him. "James, how many times have I told you to stay in the back? James, what are you eating?" James looked up at me, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of hard candies in all colors. This made me very nervous. "James, who gave you that candy?" James just stared at me, not speaking. "James, please tell me where you got that candy." James hung his head down and said, "Laughing Jack gave it to me." My heart sunk. I kneeled down to look at him in the eyes. "James, I've had enough of this damn Laughing Jack thing. He's not real. Now this is a very serious situation, and I need to know who gave you that candy." I could see my son's eyes tear up. "But Mama, Laughing Jack did give me the candy." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. James had never lied to me, but what he's telling me is impossible. I just made him spit out the candy and throw the rest away. James appeared to be fine. Maybe I was just overreacting after all. He could have gotten it from Tom and Linda from next door, or Mr. Walker from down the street. Either way, I'm going to have to keep a closer eye on James. That night, I put James to bed as usual and decided to go to bed early myself. Suddenly, I was woken up by a loud bang coming from the kitchen. I sprang out of bed and hurried downstairs. When I got in the kitchen, I was horrified. Everything on the counters had been thrown on the floor, and our dog, Fido, hung dead from the light fixture. His stomach was cut open and stuffed with candy, the same type James was eating earlier that day. My shock was quickly broken by a sharp scream coming from James's room, followed by loud crashes. I grabbed the knife from the drawer and moved up the stairs with the speed that only a mother whose child was in danger could have. I burst through the door and flicked on the lights. Everything in the room was knocked over and tossed on the floor. My poor son in his bed, crying and shaking with fear, a pool of urine staining his sheets. I scooped up my child and in his bed, shaking with fear, and I ran out of the house and went next door to Tom and Linda's house. Luckily, they were still awake and they let me use their phone, and I called the police. It didn't take them long to arrive, and I explained what happened. They looked at me as if I were crazy. They searched the house, but all they found was a dead dog, 2 trash rooms, and the officer told me that someone had probably gotten into the house and done this right before making a quick escape when they heard me coming up the stairs. I knew it wasn't true. All the doors were locked and none of the windows were open. Whatever was in my house didn't come from outside. The next day, James stayed inside. I didn't want him to leave my sight. I went to the garage and found his old baby monitor and set it in his room. If anything comes into it tonight, I was going to be able to hear it. I went inside the kitchen and grabbed the largest knife from the drawer and put it on my nightstand. Imaginary friend or not, I'm not letting anything hurt my little boy. Soon enough, night came. I put James in his bed. He was afraid, but I promised that I wasn't going to let anything happen to him. I tucked him in, gave him a kiss, and turned on the nightlight. Before closing the door, I whispered, "Good night, James. I love you." I tried to stay up as long as I could, but after a few hours I felt myself drifting off. My baby would be safe for the night, and I needed to sleep. I just lay my head on the pillow, and I heard a soft noise coming from the baby monitor I had put on the nightstand. At first it sounded like interference, like the sound a radio would make. Then it turned into a soft moaning. Was James asleep? Then I heard it, the laugh from my nightmare. That horrible, terrible laugh. I sprung up from the bed and grabbed the knife from under my pillow. I rushed over to James' room and creaked the door open. I tried the light switch, but it wouldn't come on. I took a step in, and I could feel the warm, thick liquid on my feet. Suddenly, James' nightlight came on. I could see the absolute horror laid out in front of me. James' body was nailed to the wall, the nails piercing through his hands and feet. His chest was cut wide open and his organs hung out onto the floor. His eyes and tongue had been removed along with most of his teeth. I was disgusted. I could hardly believe that this was my baby boy. And I heard it again, the soft, desperate moan. James was still alive. My baby, my poor baby, in so much pain, barely clinging to life. I ran across the room and vomited on the floor, but my sickness was interrupted by the horrible cackle coming from behind me. I spun around while still wiping the bile from my mouth. Then out of the shadows emerged the fiend responsible for all this horror. Laughing Jack. His ghost white skin and matted black hair hung down from his shoulders. He had piercing white eyes surrounded by the dark black rings. His twisted smile revealed a row of sharp, jagged teeth. And his skin didn't look like the skin at all. It almost looked like rubber or plastic. He wore a patchy black and white clown outfit with striped sleeve socks. His body itself was grotesque. His long arms hanging down past his waist, and the way he was positioned made him look almost boneless, like a rag doll. He let out that sickening laugh that let me to know he was pleased with my reaction to his work. Then he turned around slowly in front of James and began to laugh even more at the horrific sight he was laid at. That was enough to make me shake from terror. "Get away from him, you bastard!" I rushed at the monster, raising a knife above my head, then stabbed down. It passed right through him and pierced James, still beating hard, splashing the warm blood on my face. No. What have I done? I've killed my son. That day, James died, and I was arrested. I miss him so much. And sometimes I hear that cackle, that horrible, horrible cackling.